Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today. Got a great guest in store for you on the other side of the first break. Catholic Bryan's going to join us. Bryan Mercier is going to be on the air, and we're going to be talking about really finishing up our series on how to answer common objections. We got some doozies in store for you, so we're going to get into some hot water, I think, on some of these common objections. But nevertheless, Bryan is just fantastic, and you know, he's done so much work with youth and young adults that I think we really benefit by learning his approach and how he handles these difficult questions. So that's coming up on the other side of the break. We also have our Finding the Fallacy. Today's Finding the Fallacy, by the way, is the false authority fallacy. And also we're going to meet an early church father. Today's early church father is St. Jerome. He's a biggie. And I think we're going to probably try to make as much room as possible, because I don't know if I'll be able to fit in everything about this great saint and doctor of the church. But nevertheless, we will give it a college try, right? Because that's how we rock it here in the dojo. I want to give my shout-outs to all those watching on social media, Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. And also, I thank you for the black belt, George. I appreciate it. And I also want to welcome all of you listening on Catholic radio stations around the country and also around the world via our podcast ministry. You can check out the podcast at virginmostpowerfulradio.org, our flagship website, or you can download our handy-dandy phone app, which has lots of goodies on it, and it's free, so you can't beat that deal as well. Okay, so why don't we jump into our Finding the Fallacy, because, like I said, I want to make room for Jerome. It is false authority. It's actually a very straightforward fallacy. It's when an authority figure whose authority is invalid because they either have dubious credentials, irrelevant credentials, or no credentials at all. So citing somebody as an authority that's not credentialed or credentialed in a different area would be to commit the fallacy of false authority. So this does happen from time to time, and just beware when you cite somebody as an authority. Make sure that they have all the bona fides to speak as an expert on that field. And that's our Finding the Fallacy. I think that's pretty straightforward in and of itself. Let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father, because like I said, today is a biggie. It is St. Jerome himself, who was born sometime around AD 347. He died around 420, 419, somewhere in that area. So very, very important 4th century father. And Jerome was born, like I said, in the year somewhere around 347 in Stridon in Dalmatia. He came to Rome very early, perhaps around the year 354, to begin his education where Aurelius Donatus, the famous grammarian, was his teacher, along with his best buddy Rufinus of Aquilina. So they were both fellow students of Donatus, the grammarian. From Rome, he went to Gaul, which is modern-day France, where he associated himself with a group of monks in Treves. And then he went back to Aquilina, where he continued to practice the ascetical life. So Jerome starts off in a monastic setting. Sometime around 373, 374, he sets out rather impulsively for Jerusalem. He just heads out for Jerusalem, but was obliged by ill health to break off his trip So he ended up in Antioch instead. He attended lectures of Apollinaris of Laodicea and gained a thorough knowledge of Greek while sojourning there in Antioch. And from 375 to 378, he lived as a hermit to the east of Antioch in the desert of Chelus. So it was here that he mastered the Hebrew language, which, by the way, earned him the admiration of his contemporaries, because Jerome was kind of a rare bird in the 4th century in that he was not only fluent in Latin, which was a lingua franca at the time, but he also was fluent in Greek and most especially Hebrew. And by the way, he also learned a little bit of Aramaic. I think he said that he could read it, but he couldn't pronounce it. He had trouble with the pronunciation. So a trilingual early church father, and that placed him in good stead for his mission that he was sent by the Pope. But before I get to that, let's talk about him being ordained to the priesthood in 379 by Paulinus of Antioch. And soon afterwards, he sojourned to Constantinople, where he was on good terms with a couple of other early church fathers, namely Gregory of Nazianzus and also Gregory of Nyssa. And he became an ardent admirer of the exegesis of Origen. And, Origen and Jerome make a good pair because, if you remember, Origen was a pioneer in comparing biblical manuscripts, not just Latin, but Hebrew and Greek manuscripts. And so, Jerome, knowing those languages, obviously, it was a good pair with Origen. So some of his earliest translations of Origen's works date from around 379. And then 382, this is where he gets his call. He's at the invitation of Pope Damasus I, which was an early church father a couple of episodes ago. He attended the Roman Synod intending to heal the Antiochian Schism and stayed in Rome as a secretary and confidant to the Pope. It was Damasus who commissioned Jerome to make a fresh revision and retranslation of the Latin scriptures, which later became known as the Vulgate. And through Damasus, although Damasus died a couple of years later, Jerome's scriptural studies and translations of the Bible continued for 35 years until his death. Generally speaking, Jerome's Vulgate Bible was not well received in his own time. In fact, it may be attributed in part to his he had a lot of personal enemies, and that may have contributed to the translation. Also, the old Latin translation was very venerable. It was used for centuries. People memorized the scriptures in the old translation. So, of course, when Jerome's newfangled translation came out, there was some pushback to this kind of innovation. So while in Rome, Jerome also led an ascetical circle composed largely of women, which is unusual, and which includes several ladies of Roman aristocracy. He was somewhat imprudent in his relationship with these ladies in that they would meet at Marciana's house and they would pray, and he taught them how to sing the Psalms in Hebrew. And along with, this kind of unorthodox training in monasticism for the ladies, nothing inappropriate happened, by the way. I should probably add that. You also have Jerome's sharp tongue. Jerome was a very irascible early church father. He loved arguing, and he was quite good at it. In fact, while sojourning in Rome, Jerome's sharp tongue got him into some trouble where he castigated the loose living of the Roman clergy of the time, which contributed much to his unpopularity amongst the Roman clergy. So once Pope Damasus dies, Jerome skedaddles out of Rome and leaves for the Holy Land to Bethlehem, and there he reigned for 35 years until his death. Two of the ladies that were in part of the inner circle, Paulina and Julia Eustochium, followed him to Bethlehem and built 3 convents for women and a monastery for men. Jerome presided over the monastery, and Paula and Julia successively took over the convents. Jerome's life was never peaceful, as Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers points out, and in his last year he became involved with the first of the Origenist controversies against John of Jerusalem and also against his best buddy, Rufinus. I should probably make a note here that, Origen, although being a very good early church father, was prone to speculation. And sometimes his speculation actually went afoul of the Orthodox Church, the teachings of the Orthodox Church. Jerome's best buddy, Rufinus, loved Origen just like Jerome did. But when these faults were pointed out to him, Rufinus went to Origen's defense, while Jerome took the opposite tact and went towards not defending Origen, but actually kind of bringing out all the problems with Origen's, I guess you could say, theology. So they were best of buddies at the beginning, and then it turns out that they become the worst of enemies. And so there's this incredible bitter break between Rufinus and Jerome. And scholars kind of, they both hammered at each other. I personally think that Jerome was maybe a bit more bitter against Rufinus than Rufinus was against Jerome, but that's just my humble opinion. I could be wrong. Nevertheless, he also was involved in another controversy known as the Pelagian controversy. We've talked about that in previous episodes. Pelagianism is the heresy that denies original sin and basically says that you can work your way to salvation. Well, that heresy eventually percolates to the Holy Land, and eventually, it comes to Jerome's attention, so he engages in polemics against these Pelagian fellows. So Jerome, was a great scholar, but a very irascible saint. And he dies in Bethlehem, September 30th, 419th or 420 AD. Coming up next, Catholic Bryan Mercier. We're going to be tackling common objections. Stay tuned.
This is Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio. This March, VMPR, in association with the Catholic Resource Center, will be hosting a special conference for the Adoramus Society. Adoramus at the Triduum, a conference on the spirituality of the Triduum liturgies, featuring speakers Father Joseph Fessio, Dr. Anthony Lillis, and Christopher Karstens, addressing such topics as developing a liturgical spirituality, the spirituality of Holy Thursday, the spirituality of Good Friday, and the spirituality of the Paschal Vigil and Easter season. It all takes place March 14th, 2020, at the historic Sacred Heart Chapel at 381 West Center Street, Covina, California, 91723. You can register online at vmpr.org or call now at 877-526-2151 to reserve your seat today for Adoramus at the Triduum. Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light to my path." According to St. John Paul II, being a Christian means saying yes to Jesus Christ. It consists in surrendering to the Word of God and relying on it, but also endeavoring to know better and better the profound meaning of this Word. May God grant that we always rely on His Word, read it often, and put it into practice.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands on Apologetics. Well, if you live on this planet and you're Catholic, you will receive lots of objections from all sorts of different areas. And to help us work through, perhaps the best way to address many of these objections, we have Catholic Bryan himself. Bryan Mercier is joining us. Bryan, of course, is a professional Catholic speaker, a retreat leader, author, and Catholic apologist. He's spoken at countless teen and adult groups over the last 20 years. He's conducted confirmation retreats, parish missions, keynotes, talks, Catholic school retreats, seminars, workshops. The list goes on and on. He's appeared at Catholic radio and television. And also, he is a regular here on Hands on Apologetics. So, Bryan, welcome back to Hands on Apologetics.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Yeah, it's always great to have you in the dojo, and, especially with a topic like this where, we've been going through this list of common objections, and you've been putting on a clinic, I must say, about, giving really good insights on how to address these things.
Well, thank you. I've actually enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, especially, I think a lot of these objections are probably some of them are older, things that I've run across over the years. They're standard objections, but there's also some newer objections I think that the youth give, usually with sexual ethics and things like that. Would you agree with that, or has it just always been around and I haven't been in contact with it?
Well, that's interesting. I think it's been around for perhaps not a long time, not as long as the other arguments, but I feel like our culture has become more sexualized. I feel like our society has been saturated with sex between TV, between movies, between magazines, and between many other things. Let's be honest, it's about sex, sex, sex. And so they've literally transformed the way we think about morality. And ever since Humani Vitae in the 1960s, where the Pope came down and said, you cannot have contraception if you're a Catholic. It's an intrinsic evil. And so many liberal bishops and many liberal priests just told Catholics to follow their own conscience and not to listen to the church. And that started a dangerous spiral down the hill. And now we're at a day and age where we basically listen to our conscience, even though it's not informed. And even though we are not educated on the topics, we just listen to what we think is right instead of the church, who has taught the truth and is guided by the Holy Spirit and has been for 2,000 years. So I think you're right, Gary. I think it is more prevalent today that morality and moral issues are coming to the forefront of what Catholics need to defend, rather than things say like, oh, Mary was sinless. Oh, Catholics are going to go to hell. I mean, a lot of Protestants believe Catholics are going to heaven. So it's not even an argument among a lot of people. I think the moral issues and some of the more cynical and atheistic arguments are more at the forefront now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think even like 10 years ago, we had a lot more in common with the culture around us. I mean, we just assumed that everybody understood what marriage was about, and basic morality. Now, there's people out there that don't have a clue even what marriage is about, or, really strange understandings of sexual morality. So we kind of lost a lot of common ground.
I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know if you watched one of my recent videos on my YouTube channel. I don't rant very often, but I ranted on this one because I read an article about 2 weeks ago which said that in England, a man had a baby, and it was a miracle baby, and everybody was applauding, and everybody was so happy. And I was like, a man can't have a baby. I was like, that's what I'm thinking to myself. It's impossible. It's biologically, physically, physiologically, it's on all other ways impossible to have a baby. So why are we even talking about it? And of course, they were talking about transgender, and a woman had a baby, but, she thought she was a man. So, yeah, it's really transforming our culture, and our kids are going to be so confused in about 10 years if they're not already.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, you know what, Bryan, you are allowed to rant. So rant. You can even rant on this show. That's perfectly A-OK. So yeah, let's jump to let's do some of the oldies, and this still is out there. I've run into it, quite a bit, people say, well, yeah, but how do you explain, if the church is the true church, how do you explain how it persecutes everybody who disagrees with her? Case in point, the Crusades. How do you explain the Crusades in light of your claims as a Catholic?
Well, I would just first add that I think a lot of people don't want to follow the church today, and it's not because the church isn't true. It's just that they don't want to follow the rules, or there's some particular teaching that they don't line up with, or they can't understand this or that, or they just don't want someone to tell them what to do. And so they need to find arguments to show why the church is wrong and to justify why they left. Now, I only say that because I find that the Crusades, Galileo, the Inquisition, those are old arguments, but they're still very common arguments that are used today. And many people use them as weapons against the Catholic Church. They will say that the Crusades killed everybody who disagreed with them. The church was nothing but a power-hungry, rich church that just wanted to kill anybody who disagreed with them. And they wanted to get a lot of money. And so they attacked all these people and they propped up their power, and they wouldn't let anybody interfere with them, which is why they just killed them. Now, of course, like anything else, it's all nonsense, literally nonsense. And nobody who says these things has actually studied any history whatsoever. If I can just be blunt, let's just be real. They've probably read memes and Twitter feeds, but they've never actually read a single encyclopedia, because the opposite is true. The Crusades were actually wars of self-defense. They weren't offensive wars against other religions or just people who disagreed with them or anything else like that. They were wars of self-defense. The reality is that there were three reasons why the Crusades were called. And I'll get to that in a second. But first, we got to understand that Islam came about 600 years after Jesus. And unlike Jesus, who turned the cheek when people spit at him, crucified him, and killed him, Muhammad, the founder of Islam, when they did the same thing, what did he do? He went and he raised an army, and he came back and he conquered his enemies. And after he was going to sack Mecca, after they surrendered to him, he was able to do something that no other Muslim was able to do in history. And that was to unite the clans of Islam. By the way, I apologize to everybody for my voice today. But he was able to unite the clans of Islam. And he actually made a huge force of the Arabs. I mean, crazy huge force. Up to this time, the Romans and the Persians were the biggest empires on earth, but they had been at war for so long and had literally decimated each other. So by the time Islam came to power, they literally walked over the Roman Empire and walked over the Persian Empire, conquering without even a fight the two greatest empires on earth. Within the time of Muhammad, who led all of his armies onto the battlefield, he died, and Islam had conquered what we know today as the Fertile Crescent, which is a pretty good area of the Middle East. And 100 years after Muhammad died, from 667 to 767, Muslims would conquer everything from Afghanistan to North Africa, all of the surrounding islands, and pushing into Europe in just 100 years. They had taken over a good portion of the entire world. It was becoming scary. They took over all these Christian lands. The Christians had built over hundreds of years of preaching and spreading God's love and trying to convert people. They wiped out almost overnight with the sword. And so half of all Christian lands were taken by Muslims, and the Muslims moved into the Byzantine Empire, which was the last standing empire on earth. And they had taken over half of this empire. And it was at this time that the Byzantine Emperor, Commodore Alexius I, he called on the Pope for help. Now, keep in mind that this Commodore broke away the Greek Orthodox, the Byzantines, they broke away from the Catholic Church 50 years earlier and caused the Great Schism. That was no small thing. And now he's humbling himself and asking the Pope for help. The Pope prayed about it for about a year and came to the conclusion that we, quote, need to help our brothers in the East. We need to help them. We need to come to their aid. And we need to protect the Christians who are being killed and hurt around the world. So the primary reason that the Crusades were started was that they came to the aid of the Byzantines to help them in their plea for help and to protect lives. It had nothing to do with just killing people who disagreed with them. It had nothing to do with a power-hungry church or church that wanted to get rich or anything like that. Those are just myths without any historical substantiation. The second reason the Crusades were started was to protect Christians and regain Christian lands around the world and try to protect them. And then the third reason was to take back the Holy Land, which the Muslims had taken by force, because many Christians were making pilgrimages there. And a lot of times, so for example, many times they would march there, most of them unarmed, and the Seljuk Turks would come up and wipe them out, just kill thousands of pilgrimages. So what the Catholic Church wanted to do was create a safe passage to the Holy Land so Catholics could worship in peace. It wasn't just about kicking Muslims out. It wasn't just about killing them for no reason. I mean, the Muslims had started a 400-year war where the Catholics did nothing. All we did was pray for them. We prayed for them for 400 years. And then we finally, because of a request from the emperor, decided to start the Crusades to protect people and to take back the Holy Land.
Yeah, that's a really salient point that I think a lot of people miss, is that, you know, the rise of Islam took place in the 7th century. The first crusade was 1095, I think. I mean, it was hardly like a reactionary thing or, you know, what do I say, a preemptive strike of some sort. I mean, this, talk about amazing pressure. I think if you could criticize anything, it would be, why did it take so long to respond? You know,
right?
If indeed this is like a cash grab and the church just wants to kill people that don't agree with her, you know, that
agree.
Centuries, yeah. Just it's funny how, you know, people don't realize that. It's just, to me, it just kind of smacks you in the face.
I think too, what people also don't realize is that crusades were monumentally expensive. It was a long journey. They knew they probably wouldn't return. Who would do that, you know, just to sacrifice their life just to get power for a church or money for a church that they received nothing for? It was a 2-year march all the way to the Holy Land, fighting, not knowing if you were going to wake up in the night because of hordes would come and kill you overnight while you were sleeping. You had to sell your house.
Yep.
This is Matthew Arnold inviting you to listen to Happy Hour on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Every week I offer reflections on the Sunday readings of the extraordinary form of the Mass and take a traditional look at the many challenges facing Catholics today. Drawing on Scripture and medieval sources like the Imitation of Christ, I'll help you on your personal quest for spiritual perfection so that you can find true happiness in holiness. Check out Happy Hour live every Friday from noon to 1 p.m. Pacific Time on our Virgin Most Powerful Radio YouTube channel or our VMPR smartphone app. It's easy to download the app to your phone from the App Store or when you visit our website, vmpr.org. That's Happy Hour live every Friday at noon or anytime on demand. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Bryan Mercier about common objections. I brought up the common objection of the Crusades, and we talked about the motive. That it was more of a defensive war, not an offensive. It was more self-protection. And, I should also mention this, too. It's whenever you talk about things like this, and Bryan, I know you agree with me that although the motivation was very charitable, like you said, people gave up their lives, their fortunes to help fellow Christians that they on the other side of the world for a practical matter. But, they aren't squeaky clean. Some bad stuff happened along the way. We didn't have the tight command and control over armed forces that we have today. And I heard one historian describe the Crusaders as a mob of armed Christians wandering eastward, all bound by an oath to hear Mass at the Holy Sepulchre. And that was pretty much, how well defined the force was.
Wow, that's pretty good, actually. I don't think people realize that the Crusades were a ragtag army made up of so many different people, from kings to nobles, to peasants, to a large number of unarmed pilgrims who were just going to the Holy Land to pray and to pray for the success. I mean, there were so many different types of people, personalities, leaders. Sometimes leaders who didn't even like each other from different countries were in the same crusade, which led to many problems within the Crusades, would lead to many disagreements. A lot of the superiors didn't have control, like you said, over their armies. And so sometimes bad things did happen, things that happened that weren't part of the Crusades. For example, during the First Crusade, many people went down and killed a lot of Jews. That wasn't the Crusade, though. That was somebody who did that on his own authority, who wasn't supposed to be doing that in the first place. But the Catholic Church, of course, gets a lot of flack for it, for being a Jew hater and, an anti-Jewish church and that sort of thing, when that's not really the reality. You're right. There definitely were some black spots in the Crusades. The sack of Jerusalem was a black spot because they went crazy. When they finally broke down the gates, they just destroyed everything in their path. And I think even that has some context, though, because, if you're fighting every single day of your life for 2 straight years, you're tired, you're angry, you just have all this pent-up rage, you have this pent-up everything, and you finally accomplish your mission and it all comes out. It's just, that's war, and bad things happen in war. So definitely some things certainly happened in the Crusades that were not good, especially at the Fourth Crusade with the sack of Constantinople. But that was not necessarily unwarranted or unmerited either, but still a black spot on the church.
Sure, absolutely. Well, another common objection, up there with the Crusades. In fact, I think this is probably the quintessential objection as far as so-called Catholic intolerance is the Inquisition. It's actually become a word now that's used to describe any kind of intolerance or authoritarianism. What is this, the Inquisition, right? How would, was the Inquisition part of the church's persecution of those who disagree with her?
No, it was not even close. The church did not even invent the Inquisitions. The Inquisitions were state-run courts, which were very similar to our courts today. They presented evidence, they had trials, they weighed people, they heard witnesses, and then they made a judgment whether you were guilty or whether you were innocent. And these courts were all over Europe. Most people think of the Spanish Inquisition when they hear the word Inquisition. But the Spanish Inquisition was only one of many across Europe. Even Protestants had inquisitions. I don't think people realize that the Protestants had their own inquisitions, and yet they're condemning the Catholic Church for having inquisitions. I mean, I don't understand it, but that's neither here nor there. There are a lot of myths surrounding this. I mean, people will say that the Catholic Church killed 50 million people in their inquisitions, and Catholic Church, I mean, I see this all the time on my YouTube channel. The Catholic Church killed untold millions. And I always ask the people, can you give me one quote to substantiate that from a historical book? Can you give me one encyclopedia or historian that actually believes that? See, this is only anti-Catholicism, and anti-Catholicism is different than history. They're two different things. I mean, I can't say it better, so I'm going to quote Patrick Madrid, but in his book, Pope Fiction, he actually says that because of the Black Plague and the Black Death and all the people dying in Europe, there could not and were not 50 million people. In order for the Catholic Church to kill 50 million people, they would have had to kill every man, woman, and child, and then they would have had to import more people and then kill all of them too.
Yeah, I would have to spread it to Asia
right.
to make those numbers. And then there would be nobody left but the Inquisitors.
Exactly. It's literal insanity, but nobody actually stops to fact check these things. The reality is that the Inquisition were state-run courts, and the church took them over, and a lot of them over in the 13th century to deal with heresy. Specifically, a heresy is disagreeing with the doctrine of God and stubbornly holding to it. So if we've believed the Trinity for 2,000 years. But if somebody starts saying the Trinity is not true, I believe the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are three different gods, like the Mormons believe, well, that's a heresy. You know, it's not true. So the church wanted to preserve the unity of faith. And so they would use this by bringing people into court and helping them to see their guilt and hopefully to repent. It's similar to the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. There was no talk about communism and pro-communism or anything else that could lead to revolution. It could lead to data being leaked, and it could lead to the loss of many lives in the United States. You could be arrested for that sort of thing. It was similar to heresy back in the day because heresy usually led to mob rule, it led to violence, and it led to many souls being lost. And that's what the Catholic Church was trying to prevent. They weren't trying to just be a dictatorship church. They were trying to keep the truth and preserve peace. For example, in the 13th century, the Albigensians, which was the first Inquisition, they were a heresy in southern France, and they accepted a whole host of errors, including the Gnostic belief that there was a good God who created the world to come and an evil God that created this world. They also rejected the entire Old Testament, and their movement was starting to grow. Now, that concerned the Catholic Church, so they spent a lot of time trying to preach to the Albigensians, reform them, change them, and nothing worked. And in fact, they just kept getting more violent until they killed the Pope's legate. And once they killed him, they started going into mobs and killing other people and committing violence. And so it took the next 20 years of the state stepping in and wiping them out just to control the heresy. And so the Catholic Church was like, okay, we need to control these things before they get to this state. So they kind of took over the state-run courts. They put the Dominicans in there, really solid priests. And anytime there was a heresy, possibly willing or able to break out, then they would bring the person in, deal with it right away, and try to get the person to see the error of their ways before they started a whole different problem, a big cult of violence or mob violence or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that's a point that only the last few years I've become aware of, was the Albigensians were, because they believed that there was this evil God that that created all the material stuff. That included also governments, because governments were in charge of the material world. And so they were actually revolutionaries. They had designs of overthrowing the government. And so, of course, the state sees them as seditious. They want to suppress them, but the problem is the state doesn't have any special competency in telling whether somebody belongs to that group or not. Yeah, so, yeah, good stuff. So another thing that, you pointed out earlier that I think is an awesome point is people talk about the Inquisition as if there was only one. And, one of my lead questions whenever somebody brings up the Inquisition, I ask them, which Inquisition are you talking about? Because there's at least three major ones. And like you said, most of them think of the Spanish Inquisition, which is somebody should make. I mean, Monty Python made a spoof on the Inquisition. Talk about this false no popery history being ripe for some sort of comedy show. I wish somebody would come up with that.
There's been a lot of spoofs on the Inquisition. I think, like you said at the beginning of the show, the Inquisition has led to the biggest amount of myths because of things like Monty Python and torture and, the Pope just torturing people. But it's silly.
Yeah, that's true. Let me ask you a quick question. We only have a couple of minutes left, but is there any chance of the Inquisition ever coming back? I know sometimes people actually have a fear that, well, if Catholicism becomes prevalent, then next thing you know, there'll be inquisitional courts all over the place.
I don't think so. I mean, the Inquisitions went out of date a long time ago, but if you think about it, the Inquisitions were state-run courts. We still have state-run courts today. And here's the thing, Gary, there are many accounts of people blaspheming in secular courts because in secular courts, they were known not to get a fair trial, whereas in the Inquisition courts, they actually had fair trials. And so people would blaspheme so they could get transferred to the Inquisitions and have a fair trial. And we know that through modern research and scholarship and uncovered documents and secret files in the Vatican, that all the myths about the Inquisition are false, and that the inquisitors kept impeccable records. So we know what they did. We know it was fair, and we know it was a good judicial system. So I don't think it's something that people have to worry about. Yeah, that's a great point, Bryan, because you think of it operating in secrecy, but folks, it was a bureaucracy. So there was lots of records kept. So we have tons of records. But it's secret because it's kind of on the level of confession. They're dealing with people talking about their faith life and sins and things like that. So, that's the reason why it's secret. It's not, like the church is suppressing what actually went on. We actually have really, really good evidence about what went on in the Inquisitional courts. I hear the music coming up, Bryan. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. We're talking with Catholic Bryan Mercier, and more to come on the other side of the break. Stay tuned, folks.
This is Terry Barber, and Myra Brown is with me. Myra, welcome.
Hi, Terry. I am so happy to be here with you today because I am up to something that I think you'll find very interesting.
Tell me, what is it, Myra?
Well, I want to give away a DVD, your famous 3-hour talk about how to share your faith with everyone. And do you know how I'm going to do it?
Tell me.
Well, me and my friend Annie Jo are calling everybody to talk about monthly donations because that is how we keep this station alive.
Absolutely.
And so every person that answers either our email or answers our phone call will get that talk.
And they can get it by calling 877-526-2151. And just tell us how you heard about it, because I really am excited about Myra's project because we want to have Virgin Most Powerful in every state in the Union.
Yep, and we're going to do it with your help. So answer the phone call, answer that email, and I look forward to getting your prayer intention then.
God love you.
In Luke 7, Jesus said, "I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven her, because she has been shown great love." According to St. John of the Cross, Christians should always remember that the value of their good works is not based on number and excellence. Their value is based on the love for God that prompts them to do the works. May we always be motivated by true love for God and not worry so much about what we do, but why we do it.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're talking with Bryan Mercier about just common objections, having a ton of fun. And Bryan, boy, what a wealth of information. Well, why don't we move on to, I think, what would be example. The number one example as far as the church suppressing science, and this would fall in the category of the church persecuting anyone that disagrees with her. It'd be the Galileo incident. It's going to be a lot of fun. So how would you answer that objection that, Galileo is an example of church persecution?
Well, the Catholic Church, who can't have anyone disagree with them, persecuted everyone who disagreed with them, including Galileo. And Galileo proved that the church was wrong in every way. And so the Catholic Church put him in the Inquisition and tortured him and eventually put him into prison, a rat-infested prison where he spent the rest of the days of his life. Or says the anti-Catholic argument and many of the myths that surround the Galileo controversy. But of course, like all of these others, it's not even remotely close to true. The Catholic Church is not anti-science. In fact, the Catholic Church has forwarded science over 2,000 years, especially for 1,000 years in the Middle Ages. They forwarded it more than any other organization on earth. And we would not even have the modern science we have today if it wasn't for the Catholic Church. I mean, there's not a single person on this earth who has studied any of this topic who could say that the Catholic Church is anti-science. I mean, we have 35 craters on the moon named after Catholic priests for their scientific achievements. We have one of the oldest and largest scientific observatories in the entire world. We've had popes who are scientists and mathematicians and who were brilliant, and the Jesuits par excellence were some of the greatest scientists the world has ever known. So the Catholic Church is absolutely not anti-science. And the one single solitary example that anyone ever gives is Galileo. But of course, Galileo himself was not condemned for scientific reasons. He was condemned for theological reasons, sort of like heresy, like what we were talking about earlier. Now, many people will disagree with that and said, no, everybody believed since the time of Aristotle in what's known as geocentricity, where the earth was the center of everything. But Galileo changed that, and he said it's heliocentricity and the church is wrong, and they couldn't deal with that, and so they persecuted him. But that's not exactly the way it works. And so I usually ask people, and I say, okay, if Galileo was condemned for teaching heliocentricity, then why wasn't Copernicus condemned for teaching the exact same thing? Copernicus had taught it, and he even wrote a 6-volume work on the subject known as The Revolution of Heavenly Spheres. And he didn't even want to publish it because he knew it was going to be controversial. Why? Because since the time of Ptolemy and Aristotle, they had decimated any possibility of heliocentricity, so much so that every person on earth, with very few exceptions, believed in geocentricity. Everyone. I mean, even secular people believed this because it was just the belief of the day. So for Copernicus to overturn thousands of years of belief, it's insane. He didn't want to do it. And so a bishop, actually a Catholic bishop, convinced him to publish his book, and he did. Galileo continued that work, and the Catholic Church helped him. I mean, and this is what people don't understand, is that the Catholic Church funded Galileo to do his scientific research. Why would they do that if they were anti-science? They funded him. They threw him parties. He was a celebrity in the Catholic Church. But here's the thing. This is what started to get him into hot water. Copernicus only taught heliocentricity as a theory, which it was, because it couldn't be proven at the time. Galileo couldn't even prove it, and it wouldn't be able to be fully proven until 50 years after Galileo, when technology got better. So the Catholic Church and the Jesuits who were funding him said, don't preach this as a fact. You're starting to say that it's true, but we don't know that yet. And we have a lot of centuries to overturn their information and their argumentation. So we have to make sure this is correct. So treat it as a theory. But of course, Galileo was thick-headed and stubborn, and he started preaching it as if it's absolute fact. And that's what started to get him into trouble with the Jesuits. Did you have anything to add, or do you want me to keep going?
Oh, no, that's a great summary. You know, we often think of Galileo as being very humble and, wouldn't harm a fly, when actually he's a lot like our early church father today, St. Jerome. He was very irascible, loved making waves. He was a celeb, like you said. And I in some ways, Bryan, I think that we may have done a disservice by kind of contributing to his celebrity and puffing him up so much that he kind of got too big for his britches. But anyway, go ahead.
I hadn't really thought of that, actually, but that's a good possibility. So he was told to stop working on it temporarily until he could fall in line and keep in mind, these were the people funding him. I mean, so they were he wouldn't be able to do any of this work if he wasn't funded. So he kind of has to cooperate with the people who are funding him in some way, which at this time he was refusing to do. So at this time he was asked to stop working on the subject, and the Pope himself, who was Galileo's friend, Galileo and the Pope were friends. He came to visit Galileo, and he talked to him about this heliocentricity. They had a long dialogue on it, and the Pope gave him the common objections that everybody else had from the day. And Galileo would answer the objections, and the Pope was actually impressed by what he heard. And so he personally allowed Galileo to start working on it again. Why in the world would that happen if they were against Galileo and if they were anti-science? It wouldn't happen. But he personally allowed him to start the work again. And then comes the big fallout, because Galileo wrote a book about the discussion that the Pope and Galileo had. And in this book, it was two fictional characters. One was smart, presenting the new evidence, and one was kind of not that smart, holding to old, outdated, and superstitious evidence. And he quoted and used a lot of the information that the Pope had brought up to him. And so the Pope and the Jesuits really just noticed quickly that the Pope was being insulted. The Pope was the dumb guy in the book who didn't know anything, where Galileo was the smart guy. And that led to the beginning of the end, because Galileo started saying, interpreting the Bible wrong. He started saying that passages in the Bible are wrong. And he started making himself a theologian, which got him condemned in the end.
Yeah. Back to the first trial. Did Galileo actually prove that the Earth revolved around the sun?
He did not, but he presented some good evidence that seemed to suggest it. Again, it couldn't be proven until about 50 years after his death, when the technology needed to prove it was invented.
Yeah, and that's an important point, I think, because he was tried by a group of his friends. There were people that were sympathetic to his position, but
exactly.
They knew the proofs didn't work. In fact, no one today, uses any of Galileo's proofs, for that theory.
Right.
So he was basically given a slap on the hand, like you said, and the Pope was very conciliatory to him. He said, it's a temporary setback. And then Galileo turns around and writes a book where he makes the Pope, Simplicio, this kind of the village idiot who has all these dumb objections. You're kind of poking the bear, aren't you?
Well, that's exactly it. If you want to get funded, why are you poking the people who are funding you? You asked for it, because the Catholic Church was not against Johann Kepler, or the Protestant who was teaching the exact same thing, but the Protestants were vehemently against him. Yeah. So in the end, they actually put Galileo under house arrest, meaning he stayed in a huge palace and had servants. And he lived the rest of his life being able to work on his scientific projects, with the exception of heliocentricity. In fact, some of his biggest scientific breakthroughs came in after that point. If the church was anti-science, they would not have let him keep doing his other scientific research. Yeah. I don't know if anyone out there has read the book Galileo's Daughter, but it actually has excerpts from his daughters, who both became nuns and were still favorable to the church. And even Galileo died in good graces with the church as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's kind of like the comfy chair of the Inquisition. He gets sentenced to house arrest in a chalet overlooking the Tuscanies.
Poor thing.
It's like, ooh, the comfy chair. But boy, there's just so much, and you did such a great job encapsulating, a very complex subject in a really good short response, Bryan. Before the program ends, we have a couple of minutes. Tell me, what have you been up to? Tell us about your video channel, things that you've been doing.
Yes, I'm very excited about my YouTube channel. We keep coming out with a few videos each week. My YouTube channel is called Catholic Truth, and we're actually starting a Catholic Truth podcast soon as well. So I'm very excited about that. I'm actually doing a lot of retreats. I'm going to Texas, Key West, Florida, New York, New Jersey, a lot of different retreats around the country. And I'm very excited to preach the faith. So if people want to check me out online, they can look up my website, which is catholicbryan.org, Bryan. They can check out my YouTube channel, which is Catholic Truth. And our Catholic Truth website should be up within about a week.
Yeah, very good. Boy, you've been keeping busy, that's for sure.
I've been keeping very busy. I'm writing 4 books right now and recording many other CDs and DVDs as well.
Wow. Can you kind of give us a preview quickly of
sure.
Topics?
Yes, sure. I find that one of the biggest reasons people leave the church is because they don't know who God is. So I'm writing a book on how to practically pray and grow closer to God, and to know your faith and really connect with God and make your prayer life work. I'm also writing a follow-up to my first book, which was Conversations with Atheists. My second book is a Conversations with Protestants, Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and other religions. So it's real conversations I've had, so you get to see the arguments and how to respond to them. And other books I'm working on are how to overcome Catholic guilt and scrupulosity. And I have a new book coming out in April on the New Age movement, on yoga, Reiki, centering prayer, astrology, and a lot of the New Age things that are still around today that people struggle with and that Catholics have questions on.
Yeah, very good. Who's going to publish that last book?
Our Sunday Visitor.
All right. Yeah, very good. Well, thank you so much, Bryan, for coming on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
All right. Catholic Bryan Mercier. Boy, what a great program. It's always great to have Bryan on the show. And the fun continues with the Terry and Jesse show coming up next. High Impact Catholic Talk, as I say. And it's already time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for listening. And everybody, have a great day. God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.